The chamber of the Galactic Council was enormous, built from metals that shimmered under the pale glow of blue and red lights. Every wall was alive with strange symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. Around the curved table sat the leaders of many alien species, each dressed in their most decorated uniforms. Their eyes glowed, their mouths twitched, and their voices rumbled through the air. For hours, they had spoken about only one subject: humanity. The Council had called this meeting to deliver a final judgment. To them, humans were reckless. They had grown too fast, spread too far, and carried with them a kind of chaos the galaxy did not understand. Some called humanity dangerous, others called them weak. But one truth they all agreed on: Earth was a problem. The chamber was filled with anger and certainty. One alien leader with green skin covered in sharp scales slammed his claw against the table. "They are unfit to survive among us," he roared. "They challenge every law, break every order, and pretend they are equal to the ancient empires. We cannot allow them to grow stronger." A blue-skinned general with glowing red eyes leaned forward. "They do not bow. They do not kneel. They act as though their little world gives them the right to stand among giants. We must strike first. Humanity must be destroyed before they spread their madness further." The council chamber echoed with agreement. Voices rose higher and higher, the noise growing like a storm. It was a chorus of power, a sound of rulers who believed they held the right to decide the fate of entire species. But then a soft sound interrupted them. The doors to the chamber opened with a slow hiss, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. A single figure walked inside. He wore a dark navy uniform decorated with shining medals and golden insignias. His boots struck the floor with steady confidence. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. He was humanity's representative, the general sent to answer the council's call. The aliens watched with narrowed eyes. Some expected fear, some expected begging. They waited for a desperate plea, for words that would save his species from destruction. Instead, the man did something no one expected. He walked to the chair at the far end of the table, pulled it back slowly, and sat down. The silence was sharp. The alien generals leaned closer, waiting, but the human did not speak. He leaned back in the chair, stretching his legs until his polished boots rested on the table. Then, with slow hands, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver case. He flipped it open, revealing a cigarette. The council gasped. None of them had ever seen such disrespect in their chamber. To put one's feet on the table, to light fire in the sacred room, it was unthinkable. But the human did not care. He placed the cigarette between his lips, pulled out a lighter, and sparked a flame. The fire reflected in his eyes as he lit the cigarette and took a long drag. Smoke curled into the air, floating lazily around the room. The aliens stared, their mouths open in disbelief. It was as if the entire galaxy had frozen in place. The green-scaled leader slammed the table again. "You dare?" he hissed. "We declare your people finished, and you mock us with this. This insult?" The human general did not answer right away. He exhaled smoke slowly, watching it twist and dance in the pale blue light of the chamber. His calmness was unsettling. His silence was heavier than any shout. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and filled with a quiet confidence. "Are you sure about that?" The words cut through the air like a blade. The council members blinked in confusion. Some laughed, others scowled, but none could ignore the weight of the question. It was not the voice of a man begging for mercy. It was not the tone of someone who believed his species was weak. It was something else entirely, something dangerous. The alien generals whispered among themselves. Some spoke of arrogance, others of madness. But beneath their words was something none of them wanted to admit. Fear. The human sat there, smoke rising around his face, boots still on the table, watching them like he had all the time in the universe. He looked not like a man standing before his executioners, but like a man testing them, waiting to see if they understood the danger of their own decision. The chamber that had once been filled with certainty now felt different. The aliens still shouted, but their voices had cracks. Their eyes betrayed unease. The judgment they thought was final now felt less secure. For the first time, The Galactic Council wondered if declaring humanity finished was not a victory, but the beginning of something far worse. The silence inside the council chamber was heavy. The smoke from the human cigarette twisted in the air, rising toward the glowing lights in slow, lazy patterns. Every alien eye followed the man's calm movements. Their claws, tendrils, and scaled hands twitched against the table. They had expected fear. They had expected surrender. Instead, they faced a man who seemed to treat them as though they were nothing more than an audience for his private amusement. The green-scaled leader leaned forward again, his fangs flashing. "Do you think this is a joke? Your kind is one step away from extinction. We speak with the power of empires that have ruled since before your son was born." The human did not flinch. He took another drag from his cigarette, letting the smoke drift through his lips in a slow exhale. His eyes remained steady, hard like stone. Finally he spoke. His words were quiet, but every corner of the chamber heard them. "You have ruled long," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "But ruling long does not mean ruling forever." The words struck the council like a sudden gust of cold wind. For a moment they sat frozen. Then a roar of outrage filled the chamber. A dozen alien voices thundered in anger, the sound like an earthquake shaking the air. Some pounded their fists against the table. Others hissed and bared their fangs. One even stood, slamming its heavy tail against the floor. Still, the human general sat unmoved. He tapped ash from his cigarette onto the table, leaving a tiny grey mark on its polished surface. A smirk touched the corner of his mouth, so faint it almost vanished in the smoke. That smirk was worse than any insult, worse than any shouted word. It was a mark of defiance, a sign that the man was not impressed. The blue-skinned general, the one with glowing red eyes, leaned closer. His voice was softer than the others, but it carried a sharper edge. "Do you know where you sit, human? This chamber has seen kings kneel. It has seen species beg for their survival. Entire worlds have been erased by a single vote here. Yet you sit with your feet on the table as though you are above it all. Why?" The human's smirk deepened. He leaned forward slightly, cigarette glowing near his lips. "Because fear is what you expect," he said. "And I am not here to give you what you expect." The council stilled. The man's words seemed simple, but they held weight. His voice was calm, but his tone was something darker, something heavier. It was not the voice of a man with nothing left to lose. It was the voice of someone who knew more than he was saying. A tall alien, with skin like shifting metal, leaned forward, its voice grinding like gears. "You think your people can defy the galaxy? You are outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded on every side. What is humanity compared to the weight of all of us?" The general exhaled smoke again, and then flicked the cigarette across the table. It rolled until it stopped near the alien's metallic hand, leaving a trail of ash. He looked at them all, one by one, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "What is humanity?" he repeated. His smirk turned into a thin, cold smile. "Humanity is the reason you are afraid to finish your sentence." The chamber fell silent once more. The words cut deeper than any weapon. The alien leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had not expected fearlessness. They had not expected mockery. And they had not expected a man who spoke to them as though he held the upper hand, even when logic told them he should not. One by one, the aliens began to murmur. Some whispered doubts, others whispered warnings. The idea had begun to crawl into their minds, a thought they had tried to bury. What if humanity was not like the others? What if declaring war on Earth was not an easy decision, but a mistake that could echo across centuries? The human leaned back again, resting his boots on the table. He lit a second cigarette with slow, steady hands. He looked at the council, his smile returning. "You say humanity is finished," he said softly. "But I think you are afraid of what happens if we are not." The room seemed smaller now, the lights dimmer, the air heavier with the smoke curling around them. The human's words clung to the walls, refusing to fade. For the first time in countless cycles, the mighty Galactic Council found themselves unsettled, not by armies, not by fleets, but by a single man who dared to smirk in their faces. And deep inside, though none would say it aloud, they began to wonder if this man's calm defiance was not arrogance at all, but a warning. The chamber was still thick with smoke. The human general leaned back in his chair, the burning tip of his second cigarette glowing like a tiny star. Around him, the council sat in a silence that was heavy and strange. They were not used to silence. Their meetings were normally filled with thunderous voices, endless debates, and demands for obedience. But now, with this one man present, the sound had died. The smirk on his face remained. He watched them like a teacher watching impatient children. And then, slowly, he spoke again. "You talk about war as if you own it," he said. "You talk about fear as if you invented it. But you do not know war. Not the way my people do." A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. The alien generals glanced at each other, some with narrowed eyes, others with faint frowns. The general took another drag of smoke before continuing, his words calm but sharp. "Do you know how many times humanity has nearly destroyed itself?" he asked. "How many times we bled, burned, and still stood up again?" He leaned forward, his boots sliding from the table to the floor. His voice grew steadier, darker, carrying an edge that pulled the air tight. "Once we fought with swords and shields, tribes cutting each other down for land no bigger than this chamber. We thought that was war. Then came the empires, vast armies clashing, cities reduced to ash, blood filling rivers. We thought that was war. Then came fire that fell from the sky, weapons that burned the very air, bombs that turned day into night, millions gone in seconds. We thought that was the end, but it was not." The aliens listened. Some scoffed quietly, but even their mocking sounded hollow. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The images he painted were raw, brutal, and too detailed to be lies. The human's eyes swept the chamber. "Every time we thought war had reached its limit, we learned otherwise. Every time we thought suffering had broken us, we stood again. We have buried more dead than most of your empires have ever seen alive. And yet we are still here." The metallic-skinned alien with the grinding voice spoke, trying to regain control. "Primitive history. Bloody stories from a young race. Nothing compared to the wars of the stars." The human smile faded into something colder. He tapped ash onto the table, then leaned closer. "Primitive?" His voice dropped lower, almost like a whisper. "Your people have never fought with your own skies burning. You have never lived knowing your entire world could vanish with a single mistake. You sit in your safe chambers, speaking of war as policy. But we," he pointed at his chest with the hand holding the cigarette, "we carry war in our bones." The chamber grew darker, as if his words dimmed the lights themselves. He continued, his tone slower now, each word falling like a weight. "Do you know what it means to fight when you have no chance to win? To stand anyway, that is humanity. Our graves cover the earth, yet our children still build cities on top of them. We remember the pain, but we do not stop. That is why you fear us. Because you know deep down, when you push us, when you corner us, we do not kneel. We fight harder." One of the smaller alien leaders, with long golden tendrils for hair, shifted nervously. Its voice was softer, less certain. "Stories do not win battles. History does not decide the future." The human general's smirk returned. He blew out a thin stream of smoke that drifted across the table toward the alien. "Stories?" he said quietly. "Every story I told you ended the same way. With humanity still alive, still standing, no matter the cost. That is not just history. That is a warning." The silence was sharp again. Some aliens tried to look strong, but their eyes betrayed unease. A few tapped their claws nervously against the table. Others kept their gaze fixed on the human, as if searching for a sign of bluff. But there was none. His voice carried no desperation, no exaggeration. Only truth. He leaned back once more, cigarette nearly finished. "You believe humanity is finished," he said. "But look at your own fear right now. If we were so weak you would not hesitate. You would not waste your time in this chamber. You fear us not because of what we are today, but because of what we might become tomorrow." The cigarette burned down to its end. The human crushed it against the table, leaving another small mark. two black scars on the polished surface, like symbols, like warnings carved in ash. He folded his hands and stared across the chamber, daring anyone to challenge his words. The council that had entered the chamber full of certainty now felt something new creeping into their thoughts. Doubt. For the first time, they questioned not if humanity could be destroyed, but if trying would cost them everything they had built. The man said no more. He let silence carry his message. His smirk faded back into calm, but the memory of his words lingered heavier than smoke. And in that moment, the Galactic Council began to see humanity not as prey, not as a mistake, but as a storm waiting on the horizon. The chamber no longer felt like the center of the galaxy's power. The polished table, the glowing walls, the high ceilings that once inspired awe, now they seemed smaller, colder, almost fragile. Smoke from the human cigarettes drifted above their heads like a storm cloud that would not leave. The alien leaders shifted in their seats. A few tapped claws against metal armrests, others flicked their tails with irritation, and some avoided the human's gaze completely. They had gathered with absolute confidence. They had declared humanity finished before the man had even walked in. But now, with only a few calm words, he had shaken that certainty. The green-scaled leader tried to restore order. His voice was thunderous, meant to drown out his own doubt. Do not be fooled by his arrogance. Humanity is a small world, a fragile world. Their fleets are nothing compared to ours. Their soldiers are nothing compared to our legions. One strike and earth will burn, but even as he spoke, his words lacked the weight they once had. Other leaders did not roar in agreement. They did not pound their fists or hiss with approval. They exchanged glances instead, quick, nervous, uncertain. The blue-skinned general with glowing red eyes leaned back in his chair, speaking in a quieter voice than before. And yet, he does not speak like a doomed man. He does not beg. He does not even argue. He simply reminds. His eyes glowed brighter as they fixed on the human. What if he is not bluffing? Murmurs spread through the chamber. The metallic-skinned alien shifted, gears grinding softly, and whispered to the leader beside it. The golden tendril creature folded its hands together, trying to mask the trembling of its fingers. The human general said nothing at first. He only sat in silence, letting their whispers build. His calm was more dangerous than any outburst. Then with a soft smile he spoke. "You think of numbers," he said. "Ships, soldiers, weapons, but wars are not always won by numbers. They are won by will. And humanity's will has never broken." The words were like a spark in dry grass. The council felt the heat of them, not as a shout, but as a quiet truth. One leader whispered, "If they fight with such will, how much will it cost us to break them?" The chamber turned restless. Doubt had crawled into every corner. The green-scaled leader slammed the table again, trying to silence the murmurs. "Fear is weakness. Do not listen to his tricks. He uses words as weapons, nothing more." The human leaned forward, eyes sharp as steel. "And yet, they cut deeper than your armies." The silence that followed was unbearable. Some leaders looked away. Others clenched their jaws. The weight of his calm defiance pressed against them, harder than any fleet in orbit. The blue-skinned general whispered again, almost to himself. "If they have endured what he says, then what happens if we push them further? What happens if we give them reason to fight beyond survival? What if we awaken something in them that even they do not control?" The human's smirk returned, faint but chilling. He tapped the table twice with his fingers, like a man keeping time with a thought only he understood. "You fear the wrong thing," he said softly. "Not what humanity is today, but what we might become tomorrow." The golden tendril alien's eyes widened. "He means evolution. He means growth. If they survive long enough, they could rise beyond our control." The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were not filled with certainty. They were filled with panic. Some demanded immediate war before humanity grew stronger. Others argued that war itself might be the very spark that would make humanity stronger. The council was no longer united. The cracks were spreading. The humans sat in the middle of it all, silent once more. Smoke drifted around him like a crown. His calm figure divided them more than any speech. The metallic-skinned alien finally spoke above the chaos. Its grinding voice carried heavy weight. Perhaps destruction is not the answer. Perhaps containment, control. The human interrupted with a laugh that was low and humorless. You think you can control humanity? You cannot even control your own fear. The chamber froze again. The man's eyes scanned the council, daring any of them to answer. None did. His words had peeled back the truth they all tried to hide. Fear was already winning inside them. The green-scaled leader snarled, his pride wounded. You think we will back down? You think your smoke and your stories will stop the weight of empires? The human leaned forward, crushing his cigarette into the table once more. 3 black marks now scarred the polished surface. He locked eyes with the scaled leader. No, he said quietly. But they already stopped you. The leader opened his mouth to roar again, but no sound came. The truth of those words hung heavier than chains. The council that had declared humanity finished now sat paralyzed, torn between pride and the shadow of doubt that would not leave. And in that silence, the human smiled. Not wide, not arrogant, just enough to remind them all that he knew what they feared most. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was waiting. The council chamber was no longer the throne of power it had once felt like. Its walls still glowed, its table still gleamed, but the authority in the room had shifted. It was no longer held by the hundreds of alien leaders who sat there. It was held by the single human who had said almost nothing, yet broken them all the same. The alien leaders whispered in low tones. Some spoke of destruction, others of hesitation. Pride clashed with fear in their voices. The council that had declared humanity finished now could not even agree on what to do next. Their unity was gone. Their power, at least for this moment, was hollow. The human general sat still, his posture calm, his boots on the floor now. 3 black scars from crushed cigarettes marked the polished table before him. Smoke lingered above his head, curling into shapes that seemed to mock the very chamber. He let the silence hang, stretching longer and longer, until the whispers died down. Then he stood. The sound of his chair sliding against the floor echoed louder than any roar of outrage had before. The alien leaders watched, their eyes following him as if pulled by a force they did not understand. He reached into his pocket once more, pulled out a final cigarette, and lit it with slow hands. The flame flickered against his face, throwing shadows across the chamber. He took a drag, then spoke. His voice was calm, steady, with no rush, no fear. You called this meeting to declare humanity finished, he said. You thought you could decide our fate without us. But you forget something important. He exhaled smoke, letting it drift across the room like a curtain. Humanity has never been finished. Not when we were starving, not when we were burning. Not when we were burying our dead by the millions. Every time we stood again, and every time we grew stronger, the words rang against the walls. No one interrupted. No one dared. He began to walk slowly around the table, his boots striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. Each step made the silence deeper. Each step made the aliens shrink further into their seats. He stopped halfway, turned and faced them all. You think numbers matter. You think fleets and weapons will decide this. But war is not only about weapons. War is about will, and humanity's will has never broken. Not once. The blue-skinned general with glowing red eyes finally found his voice. It was softer than before, no longer booming with pride. And what if we strike anyway? What if we still decide you are a threat that must be erased? The human smirk returned, faint but sharp. He took another drag of his cigarette, then flicked the ash onto the floor. Then you will learn what happens when you corner something that refuses to die. You will learn what happens when the prey you hunt turns into the predator you feared. The words sank deep into the chamber. They were not shouted. They were not dressed as threats. They were simple, calm truths. And that made them far more dangerous. The golden tendril alien trembled, its voice cracking. You cannot mean that humanity would fight the whole galaxy. The general's eyes burned cold as he answered. We would not choose that fight. But if you force it, we will not stop until one side no longer exists. And you will not like which side that is." A hush swept the chamber. Even the green-scaled leader, who had shouted the loudest, could not find words. His claws dug into the table, but his mouth stayed closed. For the first time, he could not roar. The human walked back to his chair, stood behind it, and looked around the room. He raised his cigarette one last time, inhaled, and exhaled a thick cloud of smoke into the air. Then he crushed it against the table, leaving the fourth and final mark burned into its surface. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp, his voice steady. "You said humanity is finished," he said. "So I will ask again, are you sure about that?" The words hit like a hammer. They echoed through the chamber, sinking into the hearts of every alien present. No one answered. Not one leader dared. The human picked up his chair, slid it back into place, and turned to leave. He did not wait for permission. He did not bow. He did not even look back. The doors hissed open, and he walked out as if the chamber had never mattered. Behind him, the Galactic Council sat frozen. Their declaration of humanity's end hung unfinished in the air. Their pride was shattered, their unity broken. They had faced armies, rebellions, and threats across the stars. But never had they been undone by a single man with a cigarette and a question. And long after the smoke had cleared, long after the human was gone, the council still saw the marks he left burned into their sacred table. 4 black scars, carved not with weapons, but with defiance. The galaxy would remember this moment, not as the day humanity was finished, but as the day the galaxy learned it had underestimated humanity one last time.